Bootstrap Confidential, the podcast where we talk to successful bootstrappers about the playbook for bootstrapping.
Welcome to Bootstrap Confidential, where this episode I'm delighted to welcome John Baskott to the show. John Baskott is a serial founder, having founded a number of businesses and bootstrapped them to successful exits. So welcome to the show and thanks very much for joining us, John.
Hi, Charles. Great to be here.
I always like to start just to sort of get us going. One of the questions that lots of prospective founders have is, they're sitting on the fence, they can see the positives, they can also see the somewhat daunting negatives. And there's that moment where you decide, you know what, I'm going to leap and make the jump and go for it. So you obviously were at some big brands like IIR and Euromoney, which are huge brands in the events and media business. What was the moment when you went, you know what, let's take the plunge and do this for myself?
Honestly, the deciding factor for me was a conversation with my sister where she just said, well, you'll never know. If you don't do it, you'll never know what would have happened. However, you can always go back and get a job. And that was it for me. So I jumped in, with both feet. The second time was different. So I was probably in my late 30s. I'd been working at Euromoney for about 13, 14 years at that stage. And I could see that the company was going through change. There was going to be new ownership. There was a new CEO. And frankly, I could see that kind of dinosaur old salespeople like me were going to be a thing of the past. And I could see they were going to restructure. And I could easily see that I'd be out of the job. And I know what happened to Euromoney afterwards. I definitely would have been out of the job. And I was just desperate to control my own destiny. There was also another kind of personal element to it. I was traveling so much. I didn't want to carry on traveling as much as I did. So in that instance, I was just desperate to start something else. And I didn't really have the idea when actually one of my former business partners came to me and said she was exploring an idea. Did I want to come and help her do that? Honestly, I didn't do enough due diligence. I was just so anxious to get out of my current situation and kind of take control of my own destiny. I jumped. As it turned out, that wasn't the idea for me. But by being outside of the business, wondering what I was going to do when the first idea didn't work, I had the time to explore the idea that my other friend brought to me that eventually became 1LOD, which is the business that I sold in 24.
Fantastic. I want to talk about the difference between the first time you did it and the second time you did it, and and your approach and everything in a second. But before we go into that, I just want to come back to co-founders because this is such an important topic. Lots of people, I think, when they're founding businesses, get very, very impassioned by the idea. I'm going to be the solo, I'm going to be the founder, I'm going to be the boss, and and that is fantastic. But that also means that you are on point all the time, and there's no one else to talk to or to share things with. And it also assumes you have a huge amount of multi skills across a wide variety of important areas. So, what for you are the benefits of a co-founder, or what were the reasons that you thought co-founders are good and the way to go?
Well, I think there's a few different reasons. And, the title of this podcast is Bootstrap Confidential, right? So, and in both my businesses, we started with absolutely no money. So certainly in the kind of businesses that I've been involved in, which is launching conferences, you don't really need money. What you need is people. So that's the first big advantage. In Telcap, which went on to become called Capacity Media, we had the head of training who also doubled up and understood technology, so could do that part. We had the head of conferences, so all of the content could be done by Rachel. And then, as I said earlier, my boss's boss, who had been used to scaling businesses, understood corporate governance, understood what went into running a business. And then I was head of sales. So essentially we didn't understand this at the time, but we had all the investment we needed because we had 4 people who were willing to work for free. And if you've got a really good idea in events, that's all you need, because if you do it right, the first event is going to pay for itself. It will create money, and that will give you what you need to kind of go on and expand the business. But I have to give credit to my boss's boss, who was the CEO, that he saw that. Because I remember at the time thinking, wow, this is amazing. Someone's just come along and given me 25% of the business, even so it was their idea. But I think he saw that what he needed was not money. He needed the best possible people to start this business. It's not without its challenges. I mean, in the end, I didn't do what my mum told me to do at the time, which was have a shareholders agreement, which, by the way, to anyone listening, get a shareholders agreement. As my mum said at the time, you won't be going into a business unless you think that it's going to be a runaway success. So you have to be thinking that, or you're not going to be giving up your job and all the security that comes with to do it. However, hope for the best and plan for the worst. Get a shareholders agreement, because I didn't the first time round. And then, 2 years into it, things completely changed. The original idea died with Enron and the dot-com crash, and we weren't provisioned for what to do in that situation, and it was difficult. Honestly, when I came out of that situation, I said I would never be in business with 4 partners again, because it was challenging. Decision-making was challenging. Inevitably, in our case, it became, there was 2 of us on one side and 2 of us on the other.
Yeah, I was going to say, did someone not have 50? I mean, because again, listen to any founders listening. If you have co-founders, if there's 1 of you, if there's 2 of you, 3 of you, like I would 4 of you starts to look like a school rock band photo. But like even with 2 or 3 of you, you can't be 50-50 or 33-30, 30-33. Somebody has to have the ability to call the shots. Otherwise, you can get decision-making paralysis, and then you can end up in awful situations where you're stuck in in litigation, arguing about who has what, because nobody controls. So were you 25, all 4 of you 25% each?
All 4 of us were 25. Yeah, I mean, I suppose in reality, because there was 3 of us in our kind of mid-20s, and then the kind of CEO, as it were, who was much more experienced than all of us. I mean, he didn't make the decisions, but I guess if it came down to it, he would make the decision, and he probably felt like the boss. But no, we were 25. So, and I think that was really important, because we all felt part of it. But yes, decision making became problematic, and when there was differences of opinion, it became a challenge.
And the lack of shareholders agreement. I had a similar nightmare story with my first business, which was almost a carbon copy of being asked to join something as the head of sales, and only 26 at the time, and thinking exactly like you, wow, this is fantastic, and leaping into it for exactly the percentage of 25%. And then everything changed around a bit, and there again was a much more senior person who kind of brought it all together. And then there was some sort of financial like jiggery, shall we say, and it turned out that I didn't actually have 25%. I had like 24.5%, and unless you had 25%, you couldn't affect certain outcomes and decisions. And then suddenly and you're just there. Yeah, as you say, lesson learned, and a shareholders agreement, rather than like that sounds fantastic over a beer in a pub, is something that you do need to be cognizant of. But you said that for your first business. So with your second business, obviously the first idea with a friend didn't work out, and then the second idea did. Were you wiser about, okay, having gone through this the first time and seen the array of skills that's required, I definitely want to do this with a co-founder? Or was it just, as you say, happenstance that you were desperate to get out and they had an idea and you thought, well, I've done it this way before?
Well, what happened in reality, I mean, when we were out pitching the business that eventually became the business that we sold, we didn't talk about this kind of part of the journey. We used to say, I was working for Euromoney. My business partner, who I built One LOD, was working for a bank. He had an idea. He approached me, and we launched the business. The reality was that I'd left Euromoney to join my former business partner from the first company to start on a small business that she had launched and started in the telecom sector. But that was the one where I realized after X amount of months that it really wasn't a role for me, and we weren't really clear how it was going to scale. And she was at an entirely different kind of point of life, because she had already sold a business. So what I omitted to say is I with my first business, I was with it for 2 years, and then 2 of us left for a whole number of different reasons. Not least, we'd run out of money. We couldn't see the vision anymore. On a personal level, we'd lost lots of people we knew in 9/11. There was a whole kind of plethora of reasons. Anyway, yeah. We left. And then to their credit, my 2 former business partners stayed. They pivoted the business, and then they sold it a number of years later very successfully. But so I went back into business with one of my former business partners, but she'd already sold a business. She'd had a big liquidity event. So she wasn't under the kind of financial pressure that I was, having literally left a job and having all my bills to pay and so on. So in the end, it didn't work out. And I was kind of looking to see what I was going to do next. I was doing some kind of contracting back for my old company. But it was at this point that my friend from school knew that I was looking for a new business. He was working in a bank. He had just started in the last few years in a new kind of risk role, working in the business, and then had changed roles a couple of times. And in his third bank, everyone was asking what the other banks are doing. And he called me up and said, look, I think there might be something in this. I don't want to join you. I'm just going to help you get it going. And then when we started with the interviews and started launching the business, we realized it was a far bigger opportunity than either of us had expected. And he left banking and joined me. So, in that second instance, again, I didn't go out and choose the co-founder. It was just...
it was happenstance.
But it was very clear that we brought completely different skills. I mean, he had never been in media. In our early meetings, we'd open every conversation with, Paul has never been to a conference. He'd never, ever had anything to do with it. But he had all of the understanding of the subject matter. He had the content, contacts, and then, of course, I brought the skill set around how to monetize and produce conferences.
So you've got these complementary skills with your co-founder, and I know we were talking about this earlier. But as you start to grow and scale, initially you're employing people generally who don't cost a huge amount of money, because you don't have a huge amount of money, especially when you're bootstrapping. But as you start to grow and scale, there gets to be there's that kind of like, at what point do you kind of like sort of open up the checkbook, to use an old school phrase, and go, okay, we don't have anybody in this area. This area is really important. We can't keep on employing people who don't really know much about it, haven't got much experience. We're going to need to go and get someone quite senior, even though that's against the amount of, that's a big decision for the amount of cash that we have in the bank. Do you think you got, because lots of founders say, yeah, I should have done it sooner, or other founders say, no, I kind of like, maybe I did it too soon and that caused a cash cut. How do you think you got that balance right of when you start to scale and expand the team, bringing in those slightly more senior people?
Well, we were lucky. We had senior people that could work for us on the side of their desk, either because they weren't working or they worked late at night. So I'd always, I met my wife through work. She had always had senior kind of logistics and operations roles. So on our first event, she was able to manage all of that for us. A guy that ended up being our first employee did everything tech related, literally at night, at the weekends. So, that first product for us, so we started the business in May, we launched our first event in November of the same year. We were able to dip into people we paid them, but we didn't pay them until the end. They were willing to do it on trust. But we were lucky. We had kind of access to resources. The first person we employed was immediately after the first conference, because we had money in the bank. And that was the money that we took to kind of start investing in the team and going forward. And it wasn't an expensive hire, particularly. He was a relatively junior guy, but he came in as our head of tech, because we realized we had absolutely zero skills and in that regard. And also, he just was an amazing guy. He could turn his hand to absolutely anything. So for the start, he was the head of marketing, he was the head of tech, he was the head of database, he was head of absolutely anything that my business partner and I can do. Again, we got lucky, because I don't think we realized then how important technology was going to become, particularly in the events world, when we all went into COVID and everything became online. And he ended up being, I would say, by luck, really, one of our best employees. If I ever did it again, I would deliberately be hiring a head of tech very early on. The second really big hire that we made, which was a complete game changer, and I have to say, from the conversations that I'm having at the moment with lots of, not exactly startups, kind of 1.5 million turnover businesses, it seems to be a commonality between them is they don't invest properly in sales. And I get it. I come from a sales background, And it's even as a salesperson like you, Charles, you'll probably, well, I'd be interested for your views. It's difficult to find good salespeople.
Yeah, it's almost impossible.
It's very,
It's one of the hardest things it is.
Exactly. It's very, very difficult. So again, I was lucky. So I hired the best person who'd ever worked for me, who was still working for Euromoney. I hired him to come and join us. So I knew him inside out. I knew he was a brilliant salesperson. I trusted him. I knew he worked hard. I had no hesitation in hiring him. The challenge only was to be able to put together a package that would take him out of an extremely well-paid job. Honestly, for me, it was about getting comfortable that our opportunity was big enough that the equity that I was offering him was worth his risk. And I just sat down and had a conversation and said, look, there was a particular product that we sold. So we'd sold the 2 conferences, and then I sold a benchmarking survey. And I thought, this is more than just conferences. This is a proper business. I'm going to approach Andrew. I literally asked him, how much do I have to pay you? What's the minimum I have to pay you to get you out there? And then painted him a story of what his equity would be worth and how he would get back up to the kind of earning levels that he was used to and needed to. And I would say, I suppose, Charles, that what's really important in so many different ways, if you can, is try and start with a vision of what you're trying to achieve. So it was fairly arbitrary, but we just, my business partner hated media, never wanted to be in media, dropped out of banking reluctantly to build this business with me. But that meant we were both very, very clear that once we got the business to a certain valuation, we were going to sell. But that made employing people incredibly, a lot easier, because, you weren't just saying, oh, we're going to give you X percentage and, that's it. It's going to be great. We were saying, right, this is a number that we're not going to sell under. We're not going to sell before this number, but as soon as we can get above that number, we're going to sell. And we're 100% committed to do it as quickly as possible. So if you take this 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, percent, this is what it's going to mean. And we're aiming to do it as quickly as possible, 5, 6, 7 years.
That's very different. I mean, it's very, very different to certainly to what I did. What I know a lot of other bootstrap founders did, where you build something and you just carry on building it, and then sort of at a certain point you turn around and go, well, actually we built this, maybe it's got some value, and then you start to sort of, or more likely, your growth is going at such a pace that you're constantly hitting cash flow walls, and you think, well, let's go and get some investment to try and accelerate the growth. But such a focused plan as that is quite unusual.
And it's not for everybody, and I wouldn't say that everyone should do it. I mean, I agree, Charles. When I was in my first business, I remember sitting in a meeting with a startup and they said, what's your exit strategy? I'd never even heard the term. I didn't know what they were talking about. It's like, exit strategy. We'd just like to build a nice business and earn money. And so that, I think that's also completely okay. But you had Piers Byrne from Collingwood on this podcast before, and one of the many things that Piers taught me was that the business that you build to sell is also the business that you want to own, i.e. it's not involving you every day. You can work on it, not in it. You've got predictable revenues. So perhaps it's worth all businesses thinking about how to scale a business that you could sell or could take an investment in, because even if you don't sell it, and it's not for everybody, I don't mind saying I haven't particularly enjoyed post-exit life, but it's probably, if you can, setting yourself an objective, and it doesn't need to be sales, maybe it's revenue, maybe it's something else, but if you can set yourself some clear objectives, it really helps with decision making. So, if you're trying to grow your business to 500,000 by year 2, if that's what you're doing and everyone that needs to be is agreed on that, then maybe hiring that salesperson doesn't feel so painful, because you need to do that to get there. But yeah, look, it wasn't perfect. We got lucky with our head of sales, and but there were some other people that we really made mistakes with. We didn't hire a senior enough marketing person. We kind of tried junior people, we tried contract people, and it's only after a few mistakes that we realized that we needed to hire someone really senior. But in the end, our kind of ethos was, and I'm sorry, I don't want to take us down the rabbit hole, but was, for your function heads, hire the best people you can possibly afford. Yeah. And then for everybody else, train them.
Yeah.
And that makes complete sense. We broke with that rule. But we just found that it was much better to take raw talent. I mean, I know that we were going to talk perhaps a bit about culture, and I think that's very important from that perspective. But we preferred to take raw talent, mold them, train them, take advantage of how driven and hungry and pleased they were for the opportunity. But that required you to have someone that you totally trusted and was absolutely brilliant at the top of that function.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what we did. But as you say, it requires people at the top who can do that training because yes, they're young, they're energetic, they're raw, they're hungry, they're grateful for the opportunity, they're willing to go on a vertical learning curve and work ridiculous hours. But you need a culture that allows you firstly to train them up and secondly to accept the fact that because they're learning, they're going to make mistakes and you can't, have a kind of corporate response of you made a mistake, that's a bad thing. It has to be you made a mistake, that's totally understandable because we're asking you to learn all this at such a rapid speed. But that kind of leads me onto culture. So I'm obviously a firm believer in making sure that you set the culture, and then the business will perform according to how well you set the culture. But did you deliberately set the culture? Did you think about it? I mean, when you're talking about working on the business versus working in the business, which I want to come back to because it's such a key difference when you scale. Did you just kind of like turn around and go, okay, we've got 15 people now and this is the culture, or from day one with either your first or perhaps more likely with your second business, did you go, this is the kind of culture that we want and let's start implementing it from the get-go and this is how we're going to make sure that we stay on top of that culture and those values?
Yeah, I don't think we articulated it like that, and I can come back to that because I remember a point just after COVID where we kept on being asked by, relatively young, inexperienced recruiters to explain what our corporate culture was. Like we could just reel that off in a couple of lines, but when we couldn't, we realised we needed to do something about, which I can unpack a bit more for you. But I suppose at the beginning, my business partner was a banker. Had started at Morgan Stanley when I'd started in media in 1998. One of my learnings from working with bankers, as in my business partner and then some other people we employed, there's a reason they get paid more than everybody else. They work so hard, they work so efficiently. They won't take second best for anything. So a lot of the culture, I would say, came from my business partner, but we absolutely demanded that everyone kind of killed themselves for the business, was absolutely passionate about it. But those people that came and did do that, they were those kind of people, and they loved it, and it fostered that kind of culture to the point where I'm jumping ahead a bit now. But when we were hiring junior people later on in the history of the business, we would, if a junior person came in and they weren't working really hard, we'd hear about it from all the other juniors first because they just didn't they didn't want them there. So we did have a culture that we pushed very hard. We wanted everyone to be passionate and we wanted to produce the best products possible and have the best people possible and for them to be extremely proud of what they did.
Most businesses, you want people that are passionate, you want people that work exceptionally hard, you want people that are going to take serious pride in producing amazing products and incredible client experiences. But how do you actually, particularly when you've got so many people who are potentially in their first roles, as you say, coming in and you're training up, how do you engender that culture so that when someone comes in and they don't instantly start working and fitting into the culture, it's obvious that that this isn't for them. So, were there any particular things that you did with any kind of reward programs or rewards or monthly recognition things? What were some of the more tactical things that you did, to try and make sure that those people remained passionate and were getting fast career growth and were enjoying and taking pride in the business?
Well, I think it's worth knowing in the early days they were senior people and people that we knew, and they were being given equity to join. So they were all really, really motivated. I mean, if I did it again, I couldn't just kind of start from a standing start and then hire a bunch of grads and expect to create a great culture. But as we did quite a lot of work on understanding our culture following COVID, because like everybody else, I think we were a little bit on the back foot. We didn't quite know how to react when you'd have a kind of 25-year-old turn up in your office and say, well, maybe I could come to the office once a month, perhaps. and you didn't really know kind of whether, well, we're flexible. We want to be flexible. Yes. Well, we don't want to say no. And we just made some great mistakes of, people coming on and sitting at home and not embedding themselves into the culture. And then, as I said, we kind of, got asked this question by a recruiter, please explain your culture to us. And we sat there, and actually culture as a subject was something that we dealt with in our business, because our business was about non-financial risk, and a lot of that within banks, and a lot of that was about improving culture. So we had, for instance, he wasn't a full-time employee, but he was one of the contractors that we work with all the time. He was a culture expert. So we said, well, great, we're going to do a workshop, and we're going to spend, $5,000, and we're going to work out what our culture was. And to one of your, I think it was your question or one of your comments, Charles, one of the things that I learned in that, because to me, I just thought, oh, well, culture, what we need to do is understand what it is, write it all down, and then just go forward with that. And what he taught us is that culture changes. Culture is fluid. If you're 20 people and a new person comes in, they become 1/20th of your culture. So you can't it's not static. What you need to do is try and understand the good parts about your culture, the bits that you like and you want to foster and develop, and then the bits that aren't so good. And so that's what we did through this. And we found that the word that always stuck out for me was that the people who flourished where we worked, and one at a D, was people who enjoyed working with each other. And camaraderie was the word that kind of shone through. So we very quickly realized that we needed everybody in the office, because no one was going to learn to be comrades of each other sitting at home. We had a very collaborative way of managing our sales team, particularly, in that we were bringing in people who had absolutely zero experience, and they needed to learn on the job. So we instilled a kind of structure where there was an account manager, a senior account manager, and an account director. It was a relatively clear trajectory. You joined at 21, 22, or you could just join from another sector. We had older people that had been in sales but not in media. We didn't really want anyone who came from our sector, because normally we found that we had to unteach them bad habits.
Trying to teach old dogs new tricks is a nightmare when you're running a startup.
Yeah, and they have very high kind of perceptions of their own self-worth and value, and more often than not, our choice was we would rather trade experience for sheer hunger and determination.
Yeah, I think most founders I speak to, including myself, have similar views.
Well, but we knew that they needed training, and we couldn't rely on our head of sales to be spending all of his time doing that, because that would take him away from, going and hunting the really kind of big prizes. So we had a system where every client would have an account director. The minimum amount of time that person would have been with us is about 3 years. And the idea was that the account manager would always have a senior person working with them on all accounts. So part of their job was business development. So they would have to go out and try and set up meetings, but then the senior person would come in with them. But crucially, they would also be involved with existing clients, because one of the failings I've seen over and over again with salespeople and sales teams is, that existing salespeople with all the experience sit on top of all the big clients and collect all the commissions, and then the junior people who come in with no experience, don't understand the product, are expected to go and do the hardest work of new business development. Now, in actual fact, that should be almost turned around. The people with the most experience should be out doing the business development. Now, that's also not practical, because it's not efficient. And the people doing the business development are much more effective if they have had the experience of dealing with clients who are saying, your products are amazing. It's really turned the dial. It's incredible. What else can we do? It builds confidence. And also at the same time, there's lots of tasks that salespeople particularly, and this is true of everyone, start to get bored with the admin part of their role that they didn't mind doing in their first year. They start to get bored with. So we just had a system where an account director would always be shadowed by an account manager, and they would be on everything with them, and they would just start taking off the kind of tasks as they could do them. So the follow-up and the setting a meeting up and the taking notes, and that's how they would learn. What it meant is you had to be prepared to pay double commission. But we were fine with that. So, we'd pay the account manager, we'd pay the account director. But what it kind of led to is an incredibly kind of collaborative environment where everyone truly felt like they were working together. So the account manager might work with several different account directors across different accounts. I feel like I've taken us down in a rabbit hole about sales strategy, but
that's all good practical advice. You've mentioned a few times now, obviously COVID, which was a massive impact on lots of businesses, some of which unfortunately didn't survive. So not just COVID, but when you're building and scaling a business, as you've done a couple of times now, there are just a myriad of things coming at you from left, right, and center, and there's a huge amount of stress and exhaustion and mental resilience that you need to kind of develop, which was, for a lot of founders was heightened when something as, as once in a century as COVID happened, like, really was an existential change. What are some of the how do you as a how did you as a founder cope with that kind of mental exhaustion and and keep yourself constantly motivated and passionate and ready to go the extra mile and do the extra hours and deal with all the stuff coming at you in a positive way rather than letting it kind of grind you down?
Well, honestly, I think this is where I'm a massive advocate for having a co-founder that you can share that burden with, because there were times when, for different reasons, that one of us would lose enthusiasm for the business or would be exhausted. I mean, at the beginning of the business, I got pneumonia from staying up to 3 o'clock every morning looking at spreadsheets and trying to build websites. I also had my wife in the business, so she was looking out for me. I count the people on our senior management team as really close friends. My business partner's father died and he just had to take kind of weeks off and felt terrible about it, but I was kind of happy to pick up the slack. When we were selling the business, it was incredibly stressful. So this isn't helpful for people who haven't got co-founders, but I would strongly advise you to get a mentor, people that you can talk to on the outside, ideally a co-founder, people that you can talk to and share your problems with, because it's incredibly lonely and can be incredibly lonely. And I haven't even done it by myself. I'm full of admiration for people who do. But yeah, I mean, one of the obviously biggest testing times was COVID, as you said. I mean, we had to, before the furlough scheme was introduced, we let a third of our staff go. We gave the keys back to the office. We went home. We honestly didn't know if we were going to survive. I mean, in that situation, we kept going through very regular contact. We were meeting all the time, every day. And honestly, probably the sense of camaraderie had never been stronger than when you were faced with the possibility of, not surviving. We also did some other things, like, one of the truest things I have heard about COVID was we're all in the same storm. It's just some of us are in a super yacht and others are in a dinghy with one oar. And I think that's true. And we saw that with all of the kind of stars when they were, talking about how awful COVID was, reporting from their house in Beverly Hills. I had a nice 5-bedroomed house with a garden. And if you remember, it was quite nice weather and we were all at home with the family. It was, it was okay. Others, were going through, relationship problems in 1-bedroom flats. So one of the things we did as soon as Boris allowed us to go back to the offices is we took an office again. I wasn't going back, and lots of people weren't going back, but there were several people that needed to. So we got an office again because they just desperately needed to be around each other. So yeah, but I would really say that get mentors, if you can have a good co-founder to share the burden with you. All those things help a lot, because there will be times when you just run out of gas and you need somebody to say, it's okay, don't worry, take some time off.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We've spoken about, the harsh reality, the brutality of being a founder and everything. If you look back now over both your experiences, what's the joy of being a co-founder? Like, what's the thing that excites you most about, I don't know if you're potentially going to do it again, but if someone said to you, what was the thing that you enjoyed the most about running your own business? What would sort of be some of the things that you point to for anyone sitting on the fence at the moment right now, having listened to the resilience, the exhaustion, the brutality, the exhaustion, the pneumonia, the other things, the stress, all of that. What would be some of the positives that you would point to?
I remember when I started the second business. I've always been a product guy and a sales guy, but you have ideas, but when you're inside a big company, there might be a reason you can't do it. It might be, crossing over with some other part of the business, or there's a cost issue, or there's some other kind of bureaucratic reason why you can't do it. For me, I was just ecstatic about the possibility of building the product that the client needed without having to think about anything else, just building the right product. Obviously, you need to build the right product for the company as well. And that was just so satisfying to build the product that I've always wanted to build, to run it how I wanted to build it, and then see the results. So that's incredibly satisfying. And I think, even so, there were times when I was selling the business, which obviously going through due diligence and all sorts of things, it's quite stressful. I remember thinking, gosh, I'll never do this again. But honestly, having now exited the business, I realized that the chase is the fun. Actually, when you land at the destination, and that's not by all means not saying everyone should sell their business. In fact, I would encourage people very strongly to think about whether you do want to sell your business, because you can, as I said earlier, grow a business that can run without you, and then you're just doing all the good bits. I think a lot of the time people want to sell their businesses because they're exhausted. But if you structure a business correctly, you shouldn't be exhausted. You should have other people doing that for you. But it was the building the products, it was building the team, it was the camaraderie, it was being part of something. Honestly, building the business was the fun bit. It helps that you have a very clear objective, because every day you wake up thinking, right, how does this decision impact our decision or where we want to go? But that doesn't have to be selling a business. It can be something else. Yeah, it's being part of something, driving towards an end goal, building a good team, seeing the passion that they've got behind it. In our case, serving a community who are so genuinely grateful that you exist. All of those are the things that are fantastic about running your own business.
It's so interesting what you say about selling it. I don't think I've spoken. I mean, almost every founder I interview has exited. Um, every founder in some shape, way, or form, if not quite a lot, sort of regrets the decision with the benefit of hindsight, despite I think having had remunerative, a very nice remuneration at the point of exit. And when you're doing it and people say to you, oh, the fun is in the journey and the fun is in building the business, like as you say, sometimes you're like, really? Because it's just exhausting. It's only when you've actually stopped and basically it's too late. You look back and go, okay, it wasn't actually about the goal. It was the joy and the challenges of getting to the goal. So yes, like you, I would caution anyone who's about to sell and say, really think through what post exit looks like, because it can be a very, very different life, and not quite as rosy sometimes from a personal point as everyone would think. But I just want to coming back to advice. So I often ask this question. You got a time machine. You can go back to when you were 25 and you're about to, you've just been offered 25% and to be head of sales, and away you go. If you could go back in a time machine and talk to your 25-year-old self, obviously, as well as saying, make sure you get a shareholders agreement, what would be
Right.
what would be the one piece of advice you would give your 25-year-old self about, okay, if you're going to do this, if you're going to co-found this business, and if you're going to co-found another business, this is the one thing you'd wish you'd known you could tell your 25-year-old self. What would you really focus on?
I have said it before, but think about the worst. Think about what happens if everything fails. If somebody has to leave, what do you think fair looks like? Because much better to have those discussions when you're all friends,
Yeah.
than when you're all strapped for cash and the business is potentially falling apart. So I would definitely encourage you to do that as soon as you can. Find as many people as you can. I mean, we had some people who are very generous with their time early on. Friends, colleagues, people who've been through parts of the process. But I think, I would think that, I suppose it's a kind of overarching comment, which goes also to whether you sell, whether you don't. I think it's all too easy as a founder that, you start because you want to build something great. And if you don't employ the people who do stuff that you don't do well, if you don't employ people to do those roles, you're going to find yourself doing lots of things that you're not very good at or that you don't really enjoy. And then your kind of life will not become particularly enjoyable, and you'll wonder why you did this in the first place.
Yeah.
So I would hire people that are better than you at the roles that you don't want to do, so that you can step back and do the things that you're best at, which are normally it's always true. I think with people, the things that they're best at are also the things that they enjoy.
Yeah.
So yeah, hire good people as soon as you can, build a strong management team, and then you've got options and you won't feel exhausted by your business.
You said, get external people. Is it when you're looking for mentors, are you looking for people who've been there, done that? Are you looking for very specific people who can give you very specific skills? Does it matter? Who should you be looking for to provide mentorship if you're starting a business?
I think it is very good to have people that have been there and done that. I mean, it depends. I mean, when I met Collingwood, who is a specialist advisory in the B2B media space, and honestly, I kind of greeted them with open arms because I'd never sold a business. I'd been involved with a business, but I wasn't involved in the sale. So having access to somebody who'd been through it and knew what kind of buyers were looking for was invaluable. But again, it doesn't need to be someone who's been involved in selling a business. That might not be what you want to do. So someone who has had experience would be invaluable. But look, it takes all sorts of different people. At one point, my mentor was the former head of the British Army, and that was just because they'd been a speaker for us. They ran a leadership consulting firm, and we kind of had a relationship, and he started doing one-on-one with me. That was obviously invaluable because he came from running however many 98,000 people in the most extreme circumstances in the world. That also was incredibly helpful. My business partner had an ex-banker who'd run 10,000 people at Citigroup. Again, didn't have any experience of our world, but it was massively helpful. So I think probably, the most important thing is that you have a kind of a bond with the person that you're talking to, or you choose to be your mentor. Find someone that you respect and like, and can see the wood for the trees, because when you're in the middle of it all, you often can't.
Fantastic. John, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all your hard-earned lessons and some of those very detailed tactics about how to build and grow sales teams. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us and for taking the time, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Been a pleasure. Thanks, Charles.
For all our listeners, if you'd like to hear more podcasts on how to bootstrap, or if you want to access all our bootstrapping resources and playbooks, then just go to our website, www.bootstrapconfidential.com, for free registration.